You've tuned into Out of the Voice Box, where candid conversations bring great minds together from across the nation.
Join us for access to cutting-edge voice-related information you won't find in a textbook. Yet.
We are your hosts, Sarah Charney
and Nathaniel Sundholm.
The opinions and viewpoints on this program are those of the featured individuals, not their respective institutions. This program is not a substitution for medical care. Sara Davis is a certified speech-language pathologist who specializes in voice and dysphagia. She has a robust history as a fitness instructor. She's founded VoxFit in 2018, which is a company focused on educating, coaching, and inspiring occupational voice users, especially fitness professionals. Today, she'll provide insight on the role of optimal breath management for fitness instruction and working out in general. Thanks, Sara, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
We are too. All right, so to start off, we know that breathing is a very important part of exercising, and workouts can often vary in speed and level of exertion. Can you provide some specific examples of how breathing might differ depending on the workout?
Yeah, of course. And this definitely applies. As we know, air is the foundation for life. Breathing is the foundation for life. And so if we're going to add anything to that besides just walking around and sitting there breathing, like exercise, like weightlifting, like yoga, like bar, like indoor cycling, like Legree fitness, boot camp, etc., we really need to understand the value of how we're managing our breath flow and our breath support and just respiratory function in general. So yes, depending what you're doing related to exercise, there are different breath requirements. And if you happen to be an instructor, that adds on even more of something to think about, because that will also have an effect on voice. So related to class types, we have yoga, of course, where there is a focus on breathing, and it is literally part of the class. So it's intently focused on and guided through and coordinated with movements. And so that is an example of coordination of breath and the class, which is great, but that doesn't happen in all fitness classes or even your own personal workouts. Of course, there's a tendency, if you're doing weightlifting, especially big weights, to possibly produce a Valsalva maneuver, which is basically breath holding. You kind of create your body to be a lever, and this will help you to lift the weight. And I did a lot of research about this recently, all inspired me, because there's actually a lot of research out there about the relationship between weightlifting and voice and breath. And so anyways, there's a tendency to hold the breath when we lift weights. And then when we pull in cardio, that also is a challenge to the respiratory system, because we're moving fast and we're sweating and probably having fun, but we cannot forget to breathe. That's the moral of the story, truly. If we do, we die. And so in general, your body will always choose to breathe. And for some reason, if you're having a difficult time managing that, for example, let's say in an indoor cycling class, a good option would be to slow down or sit down. Just paying attention to the breathing is really, really important. We know it's the foundation, and it will literally control your performance.
So you mentioned a couple of really good examples of exercise, like yoga, like a cycling class. And as someone who is really competitive, sitting down in a cycling class might feel like a loss, or might feel like I am not exercising to my full capacity. So for someone like myself who's highly competitive, who might go into different kinds of classes where, like you said, in yoga, the instructor may instruct you how to breathe with the movement, versus something like a HIIT workout or Orange Theory Fitness, where there's a lot of emphasis on things like heart rate and repetition. How can we motivate people that we know who exercise to add breathing into their exercise without feeling like they're losing?
Yeah, and great question, and super important again, but literally just understanding that inhaling, exhaling, that is the foundation. So we cannot continue our movement unless we're connected with the breath. So maybe, if we're saying as an SLP, working with somebody with that issue, focusing on helping them to learn what true abdominal breath support feels like, abdominal engagement. We know in the research, it's literally not ever really your chest. It is the abdominal wall, the obliques, the pelvic floor. There's a lot involved in breath support in general and breath support for voice. So in a class, especially where you're moving a lot, running on a treadmill, doing a row machine, there might be more incorporation of those expiratory muscles to really feel and get into those exhalations that are going to support you than, say, in a yoga class, maybe even bar class, like Pilates, etc. If you tend to hold your breath as you work out, especially weightlifting, then there's a tendency to revert to the throat. There was some research also that came out related to weightlifters. Their number one symptom was globus sensation. And these were weightlifters who produced that Valsalva maneuver. And globus sensation, as we know, can lead to the need to throat clear or muscle tension or a tendency to use a backward focused voice. So in general, it's very important to coordinate your breathing when you're working out and understand that it is the foundation and there's nothing wrong with it. That's actually how you'll get stronger.
This is, a topic that I think is sometimes difficult to address with some of, at least in my experience, some of our patients who are, trying to figure out how to strategize. Sometimes they're emphasizing maybe their pecs too much or their back or something like that. And they're trying so hard to not Valsalva, but still have that high weight. Some people have actually told me that now they are reducing the weight, increasing the reps to compensate. Is that something that you would recommend, or do you feel like there's a way around it to still maintain that high weight, but make sure that you're still getting that airflow that we're looking for?
I would say that I agree with both. If the person is open to reducing the amount of weight, then yes, increasing the reps would be a really great route to go. But obviously, there are many people who enjoy lifting heavy weights. So in those people, I think it's very important to recognize and remember that despite the tendency to Valsalva, instead of literally holding the breath, using muscle tension, medially compressing the vocal folds to create the tension in there that we think helps us actually lift the weight and has been proven to do so. We want to think maybe a little more about an open, relaxed throat and producing airflow as we are in the work. That actually helps us get deeper in the muscle. Quick examples, just if you're doing a literal crunch, we want to exhale on the work. So as you're doing the crunch, you'll get deeper into your abdominals that way. Same with if you're lifting heavy weight, we want to consciously exhale during the physical exertion. You can also try using an SH sound, which is shh, or an S sound, or an F as in Frank sound. So you just continue to prioritize breath flow as you get strong, and as maybe your mind can also go to other places like the abdominal support to also help you instead of the focus being on the throat.
So, wow. Okay, first of all, this is a lot of really great information. I do feel a little bit like I am running on level 10 on a treadmill. So, we're going to circle back and clarify a few things. So, one, something that I'm hearing you say is that when you integrate breathing into an exercise, like a sit up or like a crunch, by making a purposeful attention to the exhale, it actually may enhance your workout rather than keep you from performing to your highest capacity. The other thing I thought that sounded very interesting was this concept of maintaining pressure, but achieving that pressure with a more open airway. So you mentioned this medial compression. We know that the vocal folds open to open the airway and then come together and press against each other to close and create a seal. Now, what do you think about, rather than using the vocal folds as a seal, if you were to use something like your lips or the tongue? Is it possible to mobilize the area of seal during a Valsalva?
Yes. And that's always the place I want to go with people normally in therapy and otherwise. If their focus is backward, we want to bring that focus to somewhere else, usually somewhere in the front of the face, the lips, involvement with the tongue, the teeth, the lips, etc., related to even conversation training therapy, but getting outside the therapy box. Yes, reverting that focus from the throat to somewhere else. So we're engaging those expiratory muscles to support us. So for example, if you're going to use the SH sound or just even an exhale, if it's a pursed lip exhale, similar to like if you have a straw in your mouth, your focus, your attention is going to be right up at the front of the face as you're possibly engaging your core as well. So, or shh. I always like to tell people related in voice therapy that the voice is like an open garden hose and you don't want to have any restrictions, constrictions, kinks in your hose. Often people get those right there at the throat. So it's also a really good thing to think about when weightlifting is that free flow of air up and out so that we keep that focus out of the throat and out of tension, tightness, compression, or possible injury to the vocal folds.
Let's talk injury. So, what if someone doesn't do it right? And I will be the first to confess that, if you haven't been to the gym in a while and perhaps there are other people at the gym and you feel like you're being watched, you may or may not put on 20 more pounds than you probably should. And so, competition is high. You get up under the bar, squeeze, and something goes wrong. So please tell us, what are some of the potential consequences for failing to prioritize your breathing when it comes to exercises that, one, engage a lot of strength and attention, and also endurance type exercises like aerobic fitness, like cycling, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, and actually, I wanted to mention that, like you said, aerobic fitness, really just side note, but for all occupational and or professional voice users, it's a really great idea, even if you hate it, to prioritize some kind of endurance training because your cardio will speak to how long your voice will last while you're performing, singing, instructing, teaching, whatever it is. So even if you don't love cardio, it's always a good idea if you're a professional voice user because we want to strengthen your cardio, your respiratory support, your muscles, etc. But yes, with injury, we need to recognize that there is a chance. Number one, like I've mentioned muscle tension, dysphonia, or just hyperfunction in general, which is related to a squeeze and an effort of those muscles in the laryngeal region, or even all around further accessory muscles too. And if that occurs, let's just say that just the tension aspect, if that occurs, it's not often that people will realize, oh, well, I'm just going to do this when I'm working out or lifting and not carry that over into their real life and they're talking and performing and everything else. So it's very possible that if they, assimilate that muscle tension when they're working out or because of how they're breath holding unknowingly or whatever. And like you mentioned, being new going back to the gym or something like that, or being new in a class, or you're in a class and you got put in the front row and you don't feel so good about that, or whatever the situation, anxiety and things like that can also contribute to what you're holding here and your throat. Also, vocal fold hemorrhage is very possible. This is when the vocal folds would compress a lot to the extent that the vocal fold tissues, the blood vessels in the tissues or come toward the surface and a bleed is created, which is a really, really big deal, especially if you yourself are a talker or a performer or you use your voice for any reason. A hemorrhage is, besides surgery, a hemorrhage is literally one of the only reasons we would really prioritize voice rest. It's a literal bleed on your vocal fold tissues. So there is a risk of that if you're doing a lot of that medial compression. Thirdly, there are some airway disorders that could come about from a breath holding pattern. EILO, exercise-induced laryngeal obstruction, could be one of these. It's just when you're squeezing so much, your vocal folds, no matter who we are, their literal purpose is to protect your airway. And if for some weird reason, it could be a trigger, it could be a pattern of breathing, it could be exercise induced, there's lots of reasons. but those vocal folds for some reason might become hypersensitive, might shut when you're trying to breathe. And so this is also a pattern that can come about because of a lot of breath holding or just inappropriate or inaccurate, inefficient use of breath in general.
What would you say are some good warm-ups or maybe cool downs to perform maybe before or after exercise when it comes to the voice or breathing? Do you have some that you kind of go to?
Yeah, definitely. So related to if you're the one exercising, I would just say number one, prioritize stretching. Just like we wouldn't go run a marathon without a little warm up. That's why it's important to get things moving first, but also stretch. Stretching is a little more important after the fact because let's just say you're weightlifting at the gym yourself and you are somebody that uses that Valsalva maneuver or gets tight, and we want to make sure you kind of flush out that tension. Stretches are insanely important, especially stretches that focus on the muscles of the head and the neck. Even unknowingly, we can hold tension in our jaw and our tongue. There's lots of places that can then carry over to voice. A little cardio is very important. So getting your body moving, getting your blood flowing, warming up your body first is very, very important. You know, even if you like to walk, it's really great to be aware of how you're breathing while you're walking. And then using what you learn, what you feel in your own body, connected with your breath, carry that on as you expand the types of exercise you like to do. You can start with this at any level, and it's just very important that you're aware of what your body, of what it's doing, of what the tendencies are, and your control you have over that.
It sounds like if I were a person who worked in business, let's name me Josh. Hi, my name is Josh. So
Sure.
I
Hi,
like
Josh.
to go, pleasure to meet you. I go to the gym before work. I go there at 6 a.m. It's the only time that I can get there, but I have a really, really long meeting from like 9 to noon where I have to be talking. And if I want to make sure that my voice sounds just as good in that meeting, if I do go to the gym or if I don't, it sounds like your advice would be to make sure that I do some cardio as well as my lifting. And then I think the piece that stuck out the most to me was that stretching should be prioritized not just before the workout, but really after to help guide that transition back to air quotes, normal life, air quotes.
Correct. Yeah, 100% yes. I feel like certain groups of people who steer away from stretching, and especially if that person, for example, was in a rush to get to work, it's important that that person would prioritize even a little bit of stretching. And even while driving, is there any tension being held in the head and neck? And what can you do as you drive? And can you do reset tools for voice exercises if you're going to be talking from 9 to 12 while you drive and those kind of things? So just being aware, I think, is huge. A lot of people don't even know that they sit there with you with their shoulders up like earrings, you know? So being aware, body awareness, posture and alignment, huge.
In terms of particular types of workouts, I know that we've talked about cycling, we've talked about yoga, we've talked about heavy lifting. Do you feel like one of those is actually at higher risk? I'm doing air quotes as well for laryngeal hyperfunction. Or do you think that, it's possible to, if you have the correct training and appropriate breath work, that it's really not higher risk per se? What's your opinion on that?
I personally believe that heavy lifters are at higher risk. I think understanding your anatomy and having training related to breath support and respiratory function and breathing is going to definitely help you. But as some other research has shown too, there's a tendency to do a grunt noise if you're lifting heavy weights. And that often will increase risk even more because of what you're doing at the level of the vocal folds at the same time as you're doing that breath hold or right after you're doing that breath hold. And what I thought was very interesting, because most of my life I haven't really been a CrossFit type person, heavy lifter, but I've definitely done Nautilus my whole life, Legree, Pilates, bar classes, things like that. There was a study that found weightlifting was actually similar in heavyweight, but also those 2 or 3 pound weights that you use during bar or even indoor cycling classes when you do the arm weights. And basically the study showed that increased laryngeal resistance that was caused by that elevated driving pressure underneath the subglottic pressure increase, which also increased the closure, the medial compression of the vocal folds. This happened even when the weight being lifted did not exceed that experienced in everyday life, meaning lifting a stapler or lifting something in your work setting, which is comparable to those 2 or 3 pound weights you might use in another type of class besides those heavy weights. So this study to me kind of showed that maybe no one is at particular risk because everything is connected with breathing. And if you're not breathing, then no matter what size weight you have, you're going to possibly be at risk. Personally, I do think the heavier the weight, the more of a tendency there would be to bear down and do that Valsalva, most likely.
So what I hear you saying is if I grunt when I pick up my stapler, that's okay.
That would be an interesting work environment, but hey, that has showed that there is a little more risk there when you have that vocal task in combination with the Valsalva, but hopefully you don't need it when you are using a stapler.
A really big stapler. So this has all been really interesting. I am actually really curious about, I know I keep coming back to this heavy weightlifting, but this is, I think, kind of a big one for us. I am curious, if somebody comes in and they have laryngeal hyperfunction, mostly related to the weightlifting, and you come in, they have these big old shoulders and this big chest. What are some of the things that you first start to address? And do you actually have them, reenact some of this weightlifting with you present and you go through these exercises with them? Can you kind of paint a picture for us of how that would look?
Yeah, and honestly, I've worked with several bodybuilders, so I can tell you from experience that number one, at least the ones that I've worked with, were not so much all about feeling the expansion in the lower abdominal region because they wanted to always be tight in their abs. So kind of helping them to understand, we're not pooching out your belly. We're allowing your body to work like it should. We're getting you in tune with what support feels like versus strain and effort. A lot of these people do come into the throat and use a lot of tension and effort for voice. And again, that was why I was originally seeing them, but we tapped into a lot related to respiratory function. And I do work a lot on possible myofascial release, massage, manipulation, stretching type of techniques for them as well, because you mentioned the heavy weights. When you're doing heavy weights, this does make your muscles kind of tighter and shorter, which obviously looks good, looks great. And that's what a lot of people want, is the physical aspect of it. But reminding people also to kind of supplement with those activities that actually lengthen muscles too, which again would be the stretching, would be other types of classes or exercises. Then you're going to look awesome physically and be able to breathe and not feel tense. And I even teach people the healthy way to project, the healthy way to yell even, because unless there is a hemorrhage or there's something really going on where we don't want people to learn that information right away, we want them to focus more on healing. I honestly like to teach people that, especially maybe someone like that might do a grunt or that might do another yell across the gym at somebody else or whatever it is, or in a cycling class or in another class. I tend to teach that quickly because I want people to know the healthy way to do it instead of reverting to their tension, strain, etc.
Let's talk about projection. As you know, gyms can be very loud places. Depending on the atmosphere that's being cultivated, there may be music in the background, there may be an instructor, and instructors have a lot of pressure put on them to lead a class that is both physically demanding and also entertaining. So, for those aspiring and professional fitness instructors out there, I would like you to give some of your best tips regarding microphone use, personal amplification tips, how to make it work if it feels awkward. And then finally, let's touch back on some of these warm up and cool down considerations that even an instructor may use for their voice.
Yeah. So related to biggest tips I have for instructors, Number one, it's very important what kind of mic you're using and that it's calibrated correctly with the music, in the presence of music. So let's just say you're an instructor, you teach a certain kind of class, there's music involved. Likely the music is loud because people like that, you like that, it really contributes to the energy in the room, etc. We want always the mic volume to be louder than the music volume. Even if it's just a little bit, you want to calibrate it that way so the mic volume is louder. And then if you have a master volume also, then you take them both up together. That way you'll never be straining or fighting the music. You'll always be a little bit above. It's also great to remember that the microphone will amplify you. So you never need to yell with the microphone. And even when there might be a tendency to feel like you need to project or add intensity or speed up your rate because a big beat drop is coming or a big move that requires a lot of effort or strength or resistance or like an interval or something, in those cases, yes, maybe you project a little more or use your rate to speed it up and really add that intensity to the class. But if you're doing that the whole class, people will usually, number one, be annoyed and also tune you out. And that intensity will not have the value anymore that it could when you really want to amp it up. So, keeping those things in mind. Also, doing a lot with understanding, forward voice resonance, clarity of speech, command, crispness, those kind of things. Those also contribute to where the voice is and an understanding, okay, I feel right now that I'm in my throat and I'm yelling and I'm like this. What can I do in those moments? Instead of doing the exercise, can I perch, say, on the bike? And can I coach as I move my body, but not involve strain, effort, like I'm doing the workout? That's a big secret with instructors is we honestly rarely do the workout. We really shouldn't because then we're not coaching. It's not our workout. It's our workout when we take a class, but when we're teaching, we're coaching and we're not doing the workout. So we can prioritize more our voice, our breath support, etc. And sometimes just really getting familiar with breath support in different positions. Say you hold a plank and I want you to imagine projecting or speaking from your low core, from your upper back, from your sides, just putting your mind in different places, you become open to everywhere that you can use instead of your throat, which again is really important for an instructor. In general, I would say 3 biggest tips. Number 1, recognize, are you holding your breath or are you using your breath? And I like to tell people a lot of times, imagine your voice is wrapping around the air in front of you instead of coming from the throat, like you're using effort or strain. Also, breathe efficiently, not harder. So again, if you need to pause, if you need to reset yourself, and then thirdly, this kind of goes with breathe efficiently, not harder, is embrace the power of the pause. As you instruct, there's a tendency to fill the space, but your community, your writers, your class, your clients, your students, whatever you call them, they are going to get more into it and connect with you deeper in places where you put a pause, because it's in those places, number 1, they can listen to the music more. They can think about what you just said. They can say, ooh, what you gonna say next, right? That pause is really, really important. And guess what? That's where you breathe too as an instructor. The pause is essential. So related to 3 tips, I would say those.
So it's my understanding that different kinds of workout classes probably require different skill sets, different planning for the instructor. So for instance, if you are teaching a bouldering class at a local rock climbing gym versus if you're teaching a bar class, what are some of the specific differences that you see in different aspects of fitness education and fitness coaching for the instructors?
It really does depend on the type of class that the person is teaching. So example, Pilates, bar, Legree fitness, probably yoga, maybe that bouldering class, depending how much instruction is required. All of those types of classes do require more cueing, more talking. For example, I teach Legree Fitness, and literally for the entire class, you're providing cues. You're foreshadowing, you're guiding during, you're adding counting and timing cues, form cues. You're constantly talking. Whereas like an indoor cycling class, yeah, there's louder music. Yeah, there's more intensity and movement, but you're really not talking as much, nor should you be, because if you really want people to get into that kind of class, there's a lot of balance between music, silence, connection, and then the little bits of inspiration and cueing that you might fit in there. So being aware of that when you decide what you want to teach, or you are planning classes, maybe knowing what times of day or what point in the week or how you're feeling, what's going to require more voice use. Another thing I wanted to say too, you asked about mic recommendations. This is just super short, but literally my favorite one, the brand is called AV Now for fitness instructors. This mic I have recommended to so many people. I have one myself, the headset. It can go with any mic pack, but literally it cancels out noise like no other. It picks up your voice like no other. It has a flat mic basically, and just so instructors know, we always want the mic usually on the left corner of the mouth, and it's really important you also feel where that mic is under your windscreen, because it's very easy that it can turn or tilt, and you want to make sure that it is truly matched up with your mouth. Sometimes that mic can be pointing straight up and the instructor's trying to strain around it, or it's moving their mouth in really weird ways. And literally, it's just all about making sure the mic placement is where it needs to be too.
I think this has been just a really fun-filled, information-filled discussion that, as someone who does aspire to my own fitness goals, this is really helpful information. And I will say the advent of telemedicine has made a lot of this interaction and intervention much more feasible for our practice. Sarah Charney, you were saying before, do you have the person pretend to lift weights? Well, now we can actually just have them pop earbuds in, get us on HIPAA compliant video chat software, and do therapy while people are doing the activity. So I think hopefully for you clinicians out there and for you exercise fitness junkies out there, that you are feeling much more empowered to be on the front lines of making sure that you are using your breathing, that you are prioritizing your airflow, because as we have all learned today, breath is life.
Life. Yes.
Well, Sara Davis, thank you so much for joining us today on Out of the Voice Box. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. Great talking with y'all.
And for all of our listeners, we'll catch you next time.